Hello, I'm Marietta Evans and I want you to come with me to discover what happened at the Connaught Tavern, including a ghost story.
It was built in 1881. It's a very fine building. It's a listed building, and it was originally intended to as a hotel for people coming off the ships, but it was really in the wrong place because the passenger ships tended to leave out of the Royal Albert, and people stayed at the Galleons Hotel rather than. So it transformed itself into a pub because it was exactly at the point where dock workers had to sign on for work in the days when they signed on daily for work. It was more or less piecework in those days. So because it was right next to where the dockers gathered to try and find work that day, if they didn't find work, there was the pub. So a lot of people who with dockers,
One thing or the other.
dockers' families remember it with great affection.
The Connaught Tavern, the main, especially strike time and call-out time as well, lots of men used to go down there, and there was a man here called Jack Dash, who was sort of like the strike person, a trade unionist, and he used to get the people assembled down there outside. So it was famous for that. And it was also a very famous local pub. I can't think of the French name, but there was an outside toilet, and it was metal, and it had a certain aroma, and we called it the Iron Lung. And if you went in there, you had a couple of breathals and this stuff, it cleared your lungs. But it was cleared, and it was famous. It's a French Pretoria or something, it's got a French name. But we called it the Iron Lung. But the actual gog itself, it's down there, and I'm glad it's still there. It's one of the only pubs in the Custom House that is still there.
What is your version of the ghost story?
Well, I worked in Custom House for a long, long time. I'd never heard the story. I'd never heard the story at all. But since we had the meeting at the History Club, every time I drove over the bridge to go to work, I always said, "Good morning, Ethel." It just stuck to me. But I hadn't heard of the story before then.
So, you know the ghost as Ethel?
Was it Ethel that... I'm sure it was at the History Club. They told us that her name was Ethel. I hope it was, because every time I drove over the bridge, I used to say, "Good morning, Ethel."
But I was saying this before, every time I hear the story about the ghost in the Connaught Tavern, it changes a bit. But I think we all remember, like, it was a lady who committed suicide or something like that.
Of course, it's got lots of stories, it has ghost stories and so on. And
Tell me about the ghost story. I have heard it, but every time I'm told the story, I'm told a different version. So what is your version of the ghost story?
I think we're talking about Old Mary, this ferocious old woman. She was certainly seen in the 1930s by a barman, and she was said to be the ghost of the aunt of somebody who had been the publican there. And she was said to look absolutely furious or very angry about something. And then she popped up again in the 1970s when a different landlord was taking over, and furniture was moved, things were thrown about, and once again this very angry old woman appeared, and for some reason she became known as Old Mary. And people and pets would not go up to the top of the stairs.
I heard that she committed suicide.
That was one of the stories. Nobody's been able to identify.
She was the auntie of the landlord and she committed suicide. That's the story I heard.
But nobody's been able to identify an actual suicide.
But I didn't know that the pets wouldn't go there.
The Alsatians, and they weren't afraid of anything, but they would not go up to the top of the stairs.